So, tell me if you've experienced this story before. So, you're getting ready to record a video. You get all of these ideas for what you're going to talk about. You prepare the thumbnail, the points that you're going to be talking about. You prepare graphics for the video. And a day later, you realize that you made a fatal mistake and that the video will just not work out. Now, that's kind of what happened to me, but I don't think that this is necessarily a bad thing. And what I'm going to be talking about today, I think is actually going to be more important, and I think is going to be even more truthful to how I feel about Brawl Stars. And of course, I only bring you guys the truth. So if you're familiar with the style of video, it's kind of going to be a podcast. In this case, I will be showing a little bit on screen, but for the most part, you can just listen in and treat it exactly like you would a normal podcast. And if I want to show you anything, I'm going to be sure to preface in advance. So, what was the little spiel I went on at the beginning about? Well, I was preparing a different video for the past 2 days to talk about, and I was thinking about it and making points about it. I even made a thumbnail like way in advance because I wanted to make this video, right? Because I thought this video was important. And the video I'm actually talking about is, here, let me see. It was going to be a video about polarizing matchups, which is basically where one brawler counters another brawler so hard that it basically eliminates the stress in playing. And I was making this video, right? And you can see I made this really nice little slideshow. If you want to take a look, I'm kind of happy with this graphics, especially this one. And yeah, and I came up with all of these points, and I created a whole script, right? And all of these points, and if you want to pause the video and read, you can, but I'm gonna go over why this is fundamentally flawed and why my perspective has changed. Because I have made an epiphany of sorts. So, what is this so-called epiphany I have made? So, yesterday I was actually trying to record this video, and while I was talking, I got a few minutes in, like multiple times. I tried recording about 5 times, I think. I deleted all of the recordings now, or they're just in my recycle bin. And I was thinking about it. I was like, okay, why am I having such a hard time talking about this? And why do I keep getting tripped up over like points that I'm making, points that I have written down, points that I've talked about, points that I have thought about for like a week in advance. So why am I getting tripped up now? And so today, or this morning, I went on a walk, to try and think about it, right? I was walking my dog, and at the time I was watching a scrim, Zeta Zero versus Rising Sun, and because I always tune into Chappie's streams, they're pretty awesome, and you should too. Maybe I'll link it down below if I remember. Chappie's channel, I mean. But while I was walking, I was thinking about, okay, why is this video about polarizing matchups just not working, even though I put all this time into it? And I came to a sudden realization. And it's something that I also have a problem, like if you remember, or if you've seen my first video about why tier lists are bad, you'll remember that one of the points I made about tier lists was that I hated how they generalized the meta, right? And I was thinking about this, right? And I made a connection. See, when I talk about polarizing matchups, I used so many like absolutes. If you see here, let me bring up the graphic once again, or the slideshow I made. I said things like polarizing matchups are wholly bad, right? These things are always polarizing matchups, right? Certain things like Gale into tanks or throwers into teams that aren't prepared for throwers necessarily, those are polarizing matchups, right? But in the moment, I think, and this is this just goes to show that even someone who spends this much time thinking about Brawl Stars can make these mistakes. I generalized way too much because this game, and especially right now, is a game with like today's Brawl Stars meta has so much nuance that making these types of blanket statements like polarizing matchups wholly suck, right? And like tank counters are too strong, tanks are too strong, etc., etc. Making these blanket statements, I think, is a pit trap that even the best fall into, but especially people that I see regularly talking about the game. They make blanket statements, and it just makes me cringe a little bit. And I know I make people cringe a little bit, so I think it cancels out. But blanket statements, where do I usually see them in other people? Since I gave my point of view where I fell into a pit trap of making a blanket statement, but where do I see generalization happening in other places? So, well, let's go back to that example I used with tier lists, right? Whenever somebody makes a tier list, if they're trying to represent the meta, they're trying to make it like an objective stance, right? This is strictly better than this, right? Ashe is strictly better than Frank. Gale is strictly better than Surge, etc., right? And they make all of these like blanket statements, right? But I think, no, I don't think, I know. It is wholly misrepresentative of how, like, what the meta actually looks like. And that's because depending on like mode or different maps, certain brawlers will be leagues better than other brawlers, right? And if you just use a tier list, you'll get this idea that there is a certain like brawler hierarchy, which, you know, I don't think that's, I just don't think that's correct. And I'm gonna talk a little bit later because if you've seen the title of this video, I also am talking about, or I'm going to talk about why Brawl Stars rewards creativity. So I'll get into this pitfall of like a brawler hierarchy, or of people thinking that there's a brawler hierarchy. I'm gonna talk about that a little bit later. But right now, so tier lists is one example of generalizations, and that's something that misrepresents and makes people think about the meta in a way that they probably shouldn't, in a way that's too linear, right? And the reason why I bring this up is because whenever I was watching that scrim, Zeta Zero versus Rising Sun, or if I watch NA scrims, right, there is a lot of like weird picks that you wouldn't think would be good, right? Like, okay, why the hell are you playing Primo on Chill Space as a last pick when there are quote unquote much better tanks that you can pick as a last pick counter pick, right? If you want a tank that has like engage plus CC, you can just play the far superior Daryl. Or if you just want a tanky tank, you can play Ashe, or you can play Frank. Or hell, you can play Fang or BB, or Carl is a tank now, right? Carl is viable right now, but why are they picking Primo and not one of these like way better tanks, right? Isn't Primo like, he's dog shit, right? And I think, and that actually caught me off guard as somebody who I think I'm quite an open-minded person, at least compared to most, but that even caught me off guard. So that's something that also led me to my epiphany about my own video and why it's fundamentally flawed. I'm sorry for the 5 minutes being sort of event, but it's true. I think something that's very important to, especially skill whenever it comes in power match format, is being open-minded, not necessarily adhering to like a meta, right? And if you see, that's kind of the relevance of the shitty meme that I made in 5 minutes. Not even 5 minutes, it took me like 2 minutes, right? The shitty meme that I made, that's the relevance of that. You see, silver players, they just play what they want to play, and then masters players also play what they want to play. Because this type of, and this is where I'm gonna get into creativity, this type of creativity and absolving yourself from believing that there is a strict meta and a strict correct choice, that is very, very important to improving as a player and especially improving as an analyst, right? Especially, and this is more relevant to me because I don't know a lot of other people that are just purely analytical other than other YouTubers like, I guess or competitive YouTubers like Z Replays or I guess like Kairos Time somewhat. But I also talked about Kairos in my tier list video, so hey, that video is pretty good if you want to watch it, and I talk about more points specifically pertaining to tier lists and generalization there. But where was I? I got a little bit sidetracked. So creativity and absolving yourself from the idea that there is an objective best pick. So Brawl Stars is a game, we're nearing 60 brawlers in the game. I don't know if the number is 58 or 59 right now with Otis's inclusion, but a huge mistake that I see people falling into is that, well, it's not necessarily a mistake. It's just, it is a pit trap that leads to bad, what's the word? It leads to bad patterns in gameplay and bad patterns that they make in drafting, right? So they'll see that there are certain brawlers that YouTuber A, Redditor B puts in their tier list. They put certain brawlers in A tier, they put certain brawlers in S tier, and they will think, okay, these are the brawlers that I need to play now. I need to play only Bo, Lola, Max. And maybe they don't think they need to play only, right? But 90% of the time, they will just be picking these like super safe and versatile brawlers like Bo, Max, Janet, Eve even, Ruffs, right? Not bad brawlers by any means, and certainly they'll get you results to a point, right? But I think something that's even more important than being able to recognize like a safe pick is being to recognize something I'm gonna call a silver bullet, right? And this is terminology I'm taking from another Redditor that I saw on r/Stunfisk, but I can't find the posts anymore. r/Stunfisk being a competitive Pokemon subreddit, by the way. It's pretty cool if you're interested in that type of stuff. But silver bullets in Brawl Stars. So being able to recognize, moreover, safe and good picks, quote unquote, just as important, if not slightly less important, than being able to recognize when a off-camper or an offbeat, off the beaten path pick is going to be the best choice for a situation. And when Zeta Zero, I'm pretty sure this is exactly like the mindset that Zeta Zero used whenever they picked Primo in Chill Space. Because like obviously like Ash and Frank and Daryl, all that stuff, better tanks available at the same time, but they picked Primo instead because he has the exact tools that they needed in order to like perfectly counter the enemy comp, right? Instead of picking something like Ash, which, you know, lacks CC and, well, I posted here, actually no, I'm just gonna explain what the comps were. The one side was Byron, Carl, and something, but you have to keep in mind, I forget the third pick, but you have to remember the Carl pick in particular, I think is a very important one in this situation. And the team that Primo picked on from Zeta's side had a Max on it, right? So obviously when you pick Max as an early pick, you are setting yourself up for having a tank comp, right? And the obvious choices for a tank comp would be stuff like Frank and Ash, stuff that really enjoys the max speed boost, right? But instead they go Primo, right? And something that Primo, typically a character that people most of the time refer to as kind of dog water, the thing that Primo has over Ash or Frank in this situation is instantaneous CC with his first gadget, with the Suplex supplement, right? And that's very important, right? Because, okay, Frank has CC, right? And Ash has like movement speed and damage and stuff. But Frank's CC isn't really instantaneous and you can outplay it, right? But a Carl using super into, so Carl can use super into Frank and shred Frank, can use super into Ash and shred Ash. But Primo can always just reaction suplex the super or the the flying hook engage from Carl, he can always just power throw, or not power throw, he can always just suplex Carl, get a free kill, and now suddenly the Primo team has a huge advantage now because they have this silver bullet that perfectly, see, they needed a tank and they needed a brawler with instant CC, and that is the perfect situation for Primo. That is his silver bullet situation to shine. And that type of example, I think, really opens up this, and this is the reason why I say this meta is like really cool, is because there's so many different ways you can tailor your picks in order to perfectly counter the enemy pick. 58 brawl at 59. Something. Almost 60 brawlers in the game, and there's bound to be an option that is fundamentally correct. There will be a best option, even if it's not one of those A-tier stinky brawlers, right? If you have to dig really deep into your, like, into the recesses of your creative mind. Yeah. So creativity, that's just an example of Primo, but I think creativity as it pertains to overall looking at the meta and not just like playing the game is likewise important. So I was talking about analytical people, right? And whenever you look at a meta, right, obviously you are going to recognize that some things are maybe overall better than other things. And obviously it's even better if you convey that by going over specific maps, right, and being able to indicate that nuance. Like, oh, maybe Max is amazing on this one map, but she's just like, she's good on this other map, right? And so that lets you better specify, like, oh, that there is this nuance that exists, and certain things will be better than other things, right? And I, as an analyst, recognize that some things are, well, they're not necessarily just generally better, because things may not be just generally better. It depends on the situation, depends on the game state, right? And so that's why I kind of cringe whenever people refer to a brawler as like S tier or A tier, B tier, D tier, F tier, whatever. Because there are certain situations where that brawler is better and that brawler is worse. Sometimes a D tier brawler is the correct choice, right? But labeling them as a just general D tier brawler, it makes people just not want to pick them, even when they're like probably the correct choice. Perfect example is that Primo example again, right? And whenever you're looking at a meta, and you absolve yourself of the idea that there is a strict meta, you're able to recognize fluctuations in the meta, like maybe slight fluctuations and slight patterns in the meta of things like rising, things falling, and that's how you don't get blindsided by something like in the last meta. You don't get blindsided by people suddenly saying that Janet and Max are both better than Eve, right? Because if you have this preconceived notion and you try and adhere to this preconceived notion that Eve is the best brawler in the game, right? You will fall behind, right? And you will not realize that the meta is progressing, and even maybe Eve was the best brawler at one point, but people are progressing, people are experimenting more, and they're recognizing that maybe some things are just generally better than Eve, right? Eve may not be an optimal pick on some maps, right? But if you still think that Eve is like strictly the best brawler, she's good everywhere, that leads you to first picking Eve on Super Stadium and wondering why you just got run over by Frank and Daryl. So once you're able to not look at the meta so strictly, right? Once you can look at the meta and recognize, oh, so some things will change, right? There will be things that shift, right? And things won't stay the same. You can be on top of meta shifts and be on top of the meta and be ahead, right? Be ahead of like what is being played right now, what is being most optimal. So something in the last meta, a few of my friends and I were talking about. So obviously everyone knows that like Gale is the premier tank counter, right? Or at least in the last meta. So it might change this meta, of course, because we just got new balance changes, new meta, new maps, right? But Gale was the premier tank counter. If they picked tanks, they overextended into a tank comp too early, you pick Gale, that's a good counter, right? But right now, and this is something last meta, actually, let me focus on one thing at a time. So I'm gonna talk about last meta. Last meta, some of my friends and I and pro players, people who reach like masters, legendary, we were talking about Surge, right? And Surge's place in the meta. So generally, if we use the bell curve as an example, the people on the very left of the bell curve at 55 IQ score, in this case, still think Surge is broken, right? They even after the nerf, they're like, oh, Surge is so broken, right? And they don't recognize, meta shifts, right? They generalize too much, they're not on top of the meta. This is the exact problem I was talking about, right? Same problem befalls the majority, the people at 100 IQ, right? They think, oh, after the nerf, Surge is just kind of, you don't see him like at all anymore. So that would lead them to believing that Surge really fell off. Surge is not a good brawler, right? And he's just not worth considering, right? But now all the way on the right, at 145 IQ, these are the people who, in the previous meta, and myself, not to toot my own horn or anything, but myself included, also Felipe SD, based player, he reached Masters, he's awesome. We recognized Power Shield is, and I'm sure a lot of people know this, Power Shield is a crazy gadget, right? And so many people are sleeping on this gadget that literally blocks the first shot and then refills all of your ammo, like what is it called? Like Speed Loader, Colt's first gadget on steroids. This insane gadget is legit carrying Surge, right? And we were talking about it, and we were like, oh, what if Surge is actually like an insanely safe, way to check tanks, right? You just when you pick a Surge early, it prevents the enemy comp from like going tanks, right? Because it's just so safe. The gadget just lets him, so maybe he doesn't he deals slightly worse with tanks than Gale, because obviously Gale just chains super on tanks and just effortlessly mows through them. But Surge also isn't bad into tanks. He CCs them, he feeds super off of them, it's pretty great. And Power Shield basically doubles his damage, so he becomes just a DPS tank counter in his own right. But he's still not like as good of a tank counter as Gale, right? But we were theorizing that maybe in the next meta, people will discover Surge even more, and as the meta progresses, maybe Surge becomes even comparable to Gale, one of the premier tank counters in the game. And so this was so the majority of people didn't really consider Surge. You saw him like a new pick, like, oh, I hate people playing Surge, second pick, first pick, whatever. But right now, in scrims at least, Surge is seeing a lot of experimentation, right? He's just a brawler, like you pick alongside like Byron if you want to go a tank strategy on your own, because when you pick a Surge, the enemy team doesn't want to go a tank strategy because Surge can counter tanks pretty well, right? And so now you have all the tanks for your own. Or if you're just generally going a tank weak comp, you can preemptively pick Surge instead of Gale, right? And maybe he's a little bit worse into tanks, but he's just generally a slightly safer pick, right? So right now, Surge is seeing a lot of experimentation, and he is seeing a lot of play in competitive, right? And especially at high level, and a lot of success in competitive play and high level. But a person who's not on top of the meta and not theorizing and is still like, they still only see Gale and don't consider Surge, they might be completely blindsided. Like, how is Surge like the second best or even the best premier tank counter right now, even though he didn't get changed at all, and Gale didn't get nerfed at all, right? So how is this happening? And that's like, oh, that's where you have to consider the meta shifts on his own, right? And you have to be able to recognize that the meta is shifting, and you have to be considering, oh, this thing might be able to rise because it's really good, or this thing might fall off, right? And if you watch competitive, you might be able to see those things in practice and see the meta evolve over time, right? So you can't just be locked into an idea that someone else says initially. You can't just be locked in to an idea that there are certain brawlers that I can play, and there's certain brawlers that are just too bad to ever be picked. They just shouldn't be considered. And this is the unfortunate pitfall that I somewhat fall into sometimes, because, well, just I don't have a lot of like power. I don't have any power 11s, and certainly I don't have all power 10s right now. And as a legendary player, that kind of sucks. But just by virtue of that, I'm kind of at a disadvantage. But for more people that have power 11s, they still stick to like the same 5, 6, 7, sometimes even the same 4 brawlers, right? And they only pick those brawlers, right? Because they think that will get them through everything. Those are the only optimal picks that I need. They cover all of my weaknesses. And then they get stuck in Mythic 3. And they fall to Mythic 1. And they wonder, oh, I'm playing all of these good brawlers, and they cover each other's weaknesses. So I have so many perfect options, right? But why can't I climb anymore? And maybe they'll start thinking that maybe it's their fault. But I think once you absolve yourself of the idea that there is a overall meta that you have to stick to, you can start recognizing, oh, maybe I just need to pick a weird pick this game, right? I can't just keep picking Lola or Bo or Crow or Max. Oh, Max you can, because Max is broken as shit. But you have to pick something weird sometimes. You have to be a little bit crazy sometimes. Maybe catch your opponents off guard, something that they didn't consider, right? You're playing, what's a map? Can't touch this guy removed, so I can't really use that as an example. You're playing Layer Cake, right? And every player, all 5 players in the game have this preconceived notion that Layer Cake is just like every other bounty map. Tick, Piper, Brock, Byron, Bell, Jean, Leon, etc., etc. These are the only brawlers you play, and you're last pick, and you're fighting up against, or you're up against a comp that's insane, like a Piper, Leon, and a Piper, Leon, and Rico, right? And you're thinking, God, should I dodge? Like my Lola, my bow isn't gonna do like nearly enough in order to counter this comp, right? Or it's not going to be able to be better than this comp, right? So that's when you need to bring out something crazy, right? That's where you need to bring out something wacky, something crazy, something never seen before. That's where you see Zeta bringing out BB on Layer Cake. Maybe you should bring out that Surge on Layer Cake. Maybe an Edgar if you want to get really spicy. Maybe you bring out the Primo. Maybe you bring out a Daryl pick, sudden Daryl pick. Well, Daryl is actually just legitimately good on that map. Maybe you bring out the Grom. Grom just got buffed. Carl just got buffed. These brawlers, they can help. They give you like the potential to be able to slightly counter or just like outplay the enemy comp that maybe a safer pick wouldn't. So you have to be able to recognize these silver bullets, and the creativity in how you play the game and how you, especially in how you draft, will drastically increase your rate of success, right? And so how exactly can you like be more creative and stay on top of things, right? I feel like that's a question that, or that's like the immediate question people will ask now that I have told you that being creative and not generalizing is important, right? So how can you do that? Obviously, there's being able to catch competitive games and scrims whenever they're up, right? Following competitive players on Twitter, or following just BSC on Twitter, and then like keeping up to date with the news tab, competitive, or like, what is it? I don't know exactly what it's called, but it's in news, right? It's the far right tab. Keeping up to date with that, checking it regularly, being able to catch these games, right? Replays of these games, following streamers like Ark who stream stuff like Queso, and I'm pretty sure Snapdragon, but I'm not sure on that one. I know Queso for a fact though. But being able to stay on top of the meta and see what the best players in the game are experimenting with will increase your creativity substantially, right? But of course, not everyone no-lifes all competitive content like I do, right? And I can understand, like, I think that's totally understandable. I don't think anyone should expect you to watch every single competitive game, watch 30 hours of competitive gameplay straight like I do, right? So what else can you do? Well, I think simply you can adhere to my point of view, which is to, whenever there's discussion about a brawler and you want to say something like, oh, Sandy is B tier after the meta, or after the balance changes, right? You say this, you've seen Sandy being played, you've seen him getting a little bit of success, right? You think he hasn't changed much in general. However, instead of saying something as objective sounding as Sandy is B tier, you can say something like Sandy is good. Sandy is usable. He is good in these places. He is still good because A, B, and C, whatever. He still has his gadget, he still has his utility, he's still good on close range maps, right? Maybe he deals, some of his 1v1 matchups are a little bit worse, especially against stuff like Surge. But Sandy, still good, right? And instead of saying something as general as Sandy as B tier, you elaborate a little bit, right? And that gets you thinking about, oh, so if Sandy is still good, right? But he gets countered by all of these things, why don't I, instead of picking Sandy, I pick these things that both serve a separate role, but also can beat Sandy now after the balance changes, right? So that helps you be more adaptable, right? So instead of thinking, oh, Sandy is B tier, leaving it at that, you can increase just your thought process. You can expand how you're thinking about the game by just rewording certain things about how you think and certain things that other people think. And maybe you bug like me, you annoy the shit out of people and tell them and slam the table and get mad that they're using stupid terminology like Eve is still S tier. You get on their nerves so hard and you make them feel dumb, feel bad for using terminology that doesn't make sense and is very subjective, even though they think it's objective. But I probably recommend you not do that because that personally is just a me thing, me being a weirdo. And yeah, so maybe these are two slight things. Maybe it's a bit petty, like, oh, you expect me to stay on top of the meta by watching old gameplay, right? Or like old competitive gameplay, or just something as petty as just changing the way I talk. How is that going to help me be more creative, right? Well, I have something a little bit more objective for you. This is the third tip, and I think it's going to be the final tip I go over, and it's that in your games, don't be afraid to just play something, right? Play something that maybe you like, but may not necessarily be like typically good, right? Don't care that your opponent starts shooting at the beginning of the game. If you think that this pick is good, right, and you are good at this pick, you should play it, right? And especially if you want to expand the amount of brawlers that you have like this, that may not necessarily be standard, right, but can be good in certain situations, you should pick up some other brawlers, right? You should just start practicing some other brawlers. Practice them in Showdown for all I care. Practice them in Map Maker, whatever. Do whatever, right? But practice these brawlers, right? So I think this is a personal example for me. But so I am, like, if you know me, I am the type of person to main like throwers and snipers and like high damage ranged brawlers, basically. I main stuff like B and Griff, Grom, and I play a lot of Gale, a lot of Spike, right? And so I'm not accustomed to playing like non-glass cannons, right? But one day I decided, and I was talking to my friend, he reached Masters, his name's the Lucas 3000, if you're familiar with him. Cracked player, right? And he opened my mind to the world of tanks. Not the game, but literally tanks in Brawl Stars, right? Stuff like BB, Fang, Frank, whatever, Rosa, all of these brawlers that are typically very risky, and I'm not personally comfortable playing, right? I don't usually play like high HP melee brawlers. Like that is the complete opposite of what I play. I play ranged, low HP brawlers. And so I began my journey to learn how to play tanks. I started by leveling up my Frank, I leveled up my Fang, I practiced both of them, and now I love tanks, right? And I can say for sure that tanks are really stinking good right now. And so I just took time to practice this class of characters that I didn't think I would like, and now I do like, right? I expanded my horizons, and now I have this valuable skill of being able to play tanks, right? Being able to pick important counter picks like Daryl, whereas I was kind of shit. Like, even though I had that as available, I didn't know how to play it, right? So I think that's my final tip. Learning brawlers that are like opposite to what you usually play. Like if you play tanks, go at it and try and learn how to play Piper or something. If you like have a good device and you absolutely despise fighting against throwers, try and pick up Mortis, right? Mortis, maybe not the best he's ever been, right? Still definitely a good pick and definitely rewarding in the right hands, right? So just try learning things that you may have never thought to learn. Just pick up, maybe spin a wheel, like an online randomizer, right? Put all brawlers in there and just whatever brawler it lands on, that's the brawler you're just gonna play for like 2 days straight, and you're gonna try and learn that brawler, right? And then now you'll have a new option for a silver bullet to bring out in your next game. And now, speaking of silver bullet, I guess Colt is also an example of that. Learning Colt is just lets you outplay. He's pretty good on some heist maps. I've gotten destroyed by Colts on Backyard Bowl today, being the first day of the new season of Power League. But yeah, maybe I should go over what I've talked about. So try not to generalize the way you think about things and make blanket statements, because it happens to the best of us, right? Even me, focusing on polarizing matchups and thinking that this would be an amazing idea, and then finding that, it not so amazing, right? Not very truthful to what like the nuance that's actually involved. And maybe I'll go over that nuance, right? But that's exactly why I make a draft guide, right? To actually, whenever somebody asks me, what is the meta, right? I wish I could just sit down with them and talk with them for an hour about every map in the game and all of the nuance and the different metas on each map. But that's why I have a draft guide, and that's maybe a little bit later down the road, I'm gonna make a video on the draft guide once it's all said and done, or at least once I have 3 modes done. So yeah, don't generalize, open your mind, and then be creative, right? Be creative with your picks and stay on top of the meta. Don't get blindsided by meta developments. And lastly, expand your horizons, right? Take initiative in actually learning new brawlers and keeping on top of the meta and being able to change the way you think about the game. Be flexible in how you think about the game, and especially if you can, learn new brawlers. Don't just lock yourself into the same brawlers. It'll make the game much more fun for you, and it'll get you a lot more success. I can speak from God, I'm blanking. I can speak from my own experiences. Yes, there we go. I can speak from my own experiences. So yeah, if you like what you heard, be sure to like the video and subscribe, and because it lets me know that these are the types of videos that you guys like, and it also really helps my mental health. But anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you whenever I bring politics into Brawl Stars, talking about the Berlin Wall and Carl. Thank you so much for watching. See ya.